there's so many ways to, both as the creator and as what you want to present to the reader, the viewer, etc., to say, here's our lens, here's our path. And when you find different cultures and you look at, okay, here is their worldview, here are the things, their history, their geography, their language, all the things that have influenced their history. There are elements of this I want to understand, because I think this is how I can do this story justice and be with my reader, my viewer, etc., on this particular journey in this story. One area that I've been researching a lot currently, I live in Eugene, Oregon, and north of us in British Columbia, there's an area of islands known as the Haida Gwaii. They used to be under colonial terms the Queen Charlotte Islands, but the traditional name is the Haida Gwaii. People there have this amazing culture that just got wiped out due to colonialization, or colonialism, excuse me. But the vibrancy of this culture and their traditions and their sense of a layered, interrelated reality has been enthralling to me, not only as an artist, but someone just trying to also make sense of life. I think we also come to our stories and part of, there are things we want to understand, or you know what, here's what I've done with this work, and if you get something out of it that helps you, here you go. So I think that's how, yeah, we just need to where's the next person? Right there.
Several of you mentioned using people who come from certain cultures or experts or academics' insights, and I guess I see where that could come in handy for nonfiction or historical fiction, but how do you bridge that additional gap for, say, oh, by the way, the reason I'm asking you about Zulu mythology is because I'm writing a fantasy novel. How do you, tell somebody you're taking their culture or backgrounds and adapting it into fantasy or science fiction, I suppose?
I asked last year G. Willow Wilson, who rebooted Ms. Marvel as a Muslim American young woman. G. Willow Wilson came to Eugene and gave a talk. And I asked her a similar question. Because like I said, I deal with characters from around the world. I try to include a range of cultures, races, and ethnicities. And I said, clearly, I am not a reflection of my characters, but I want to try to do this as authentically as I can. How do I come to this in a way that is respectful and that I try to get as much verisimilitude as I can? And she says, research, yes, but talk to people. Talk to the people living in these cultures, talk to the people living in these communities that you are trying to portray. Understand their stories, understand their challenges, understand their daily lives as best you can, and tell those voices, portray those voices as honestly as you can.
That's an interesting question, because I know for me, I guess as somebody who has been active in writing and publishing, etc., for a couple decades now, I have many writer friends who themselves hail from different countries, who come from backgrounds with very different experiences than mine, and they're writers too, so they get it without there being the sort of awkwardness you talk about. But generally speaking, people are quite happy to help when you call them and say, I'm working on a novel and I'd like to know about this topic. It's as simple as that.
We have time for one more question. Who else has some? Right there. Okay.
How often do you guys find yourselves not only exploring different cultures, but also their different political systems and maybe even economics, and how that shapes your story?
Different economic systems, especially different political systems. Who's going to tackle that?
I'm not a world builder. I don't think that's a good question for me.
I keep up with it because it affects family and friends. My family is international, so if there's something political going on, I like to know who's going to be in the middle of an uproar somewhere. Beyond that,
I was going to say I definitely have to explore that in a society that I'm working with, wherein I'm sort of mixing some of the ideas in ancient Aztec culture, where Instead of having wars to decide things, they would have pitched battles called Wars of the Flowers. And Wars of the Flowers actually served the function of, it was an interesting way to control war. It was as if people accepted, okay, yes, we're going to have war. We might as well just do it every now and then, ritually, and get it over with, and give, sacrifices to the gods and all that, and we're done. And that's how we handle it. And so I really think that idea is fascinating. So I'm sort of using the same sort of idea, not in the same way at all. You probably wouldn't even know it unless I told you like this now. But I'm using an event to decide a political hierarchy, basically, in the novel that I'm working on now. And that keeps throwing my head off. Like, I keep trying to, if it were just strict feudalism of some kind, like feudal Japan, feudal China, it would probably be much easier. But I'm actually trying to shake up the political system possibly every 12 years based on this one event. So that is interesting. And then I do try to think more about the economy, because I think a lot of times that's the thing that's left out. No one's thinking about, well, what happens if this crop crashes? Even though it's a fantasy or a mythical culture, you still got to eat usually, unless you've got some other way around that. Like, people aren't thinking about natural resources, like, how would the natural resources available or not available affect this culture? I've often seen people who clearly don't have a sense of that in their novels, and things are happening that there's just no way it would happen, because you're missing this key resource. So I think all those kind of things do play into it a lot. I try to think about it a lot, but I don't know. We'll see whether I succeed.
I feel like also stuff like that, the little details, like they inform your characters, like your actions and how they conduct themselves, and because the way culture approaches money or politics is reflective of how they view other things, and so there's probably all sorts of little details in there, like how they view, like, bargaining, for example. Like, if someone names a price, are you expected to haggle on it, or is it, like, wildly offensive for you to be like, well, can you do, like, so there's lots of little stuff in there that really, I feel like, would flush out world building for people to consider. And it's nice to hear that, authors do have to think about these kind of things.
Well, I mean, like, there's culture, like, I'm thinking of Chinese culture. They think you're nuts if you don't haggle, but they hate it when you tip.
Yeah.
Like, you're not supposed to tip them. That's wrong. That's very offensive. But if you don't haggle, that's also
there's
offensive.
like,
and you're an idiot, if you don't.
I
mean,
had a client when I used to sell produce on the city market who was Kurdish, and he missed the whole banter and stuff you did in the market. So he used to come up and we would get into it and just have this ball. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to pay my bills because of you, but I will sell it to you I will give it to you for $1 because you remind me of my uncle who I miss very much. And we would have this whole thing and we would just be laughing and just rolling with it. And he's like, you're so much like my granddaughter. And, I wouldn't deal with you if you weren't like her. And, the other people are around and like, what the hell is this? And it's like, this is real barter trade.
People live in the world.
Yeah.
And being I write primarily like sword and sorcery stuff because my degree was in medieval history. I mean, but you can't study medieval history if you don't study medieval trade, because that's